and roll.
Welcome to the Locker Room, where we break down sermon stories and scripture for the race of our faith. If this podcast has been serving you, hit follow and the notification bell. That way you can stay up to date on any new episodes. Brittney B., good to have you at the table.
Thanks.
Alongside Rod and Libby.
Hello.
Brittney, what is your favorite food at a Mexican restaurant?
So, my current favorite restaurant is called El Toro Bravo, and it's off the 44th exit on Clyde Park. It's an old Wendy's, and they have the best birria tacos. And birria is like a slow-cooked meat that they like throw in this fried tortilla shell thing, and they like pack it with cheese. And it's just the best. Order it, everyone.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Right now.
What kind of slow-cooked meat? What genre of meat?
It's beef.
Oh.
Let's do it tonight, Lev, for dinner.
What genre?
I'll send you the place.
I can't have the cheese, but I do like Mexican food. Tacos El Canado, still my favorite taco place on the planet, but only the one down by the west side that you basically walk in, can order, and anyway.
Don't sleep on El Burrito up on the Beltline. Don't sleep on it.
I know.
Yeah.
What else? Oh, which is the one that's like a Grand Rapids start? Adobe? No. That's
Beltline Bar?
No. The one right down here.
I just heard like that place wasn't so good.
What, the Beltline Bar?
Yeah, I just
Sorry,
heard that
Beltline
today.
Bar.
It's a cult classic.
Oh, okay.
It's an iconic.
It goes way back. So
I probably
even
wasn't alive
yesterday,
then.
someone texted me and said, we're celebrating 32-year wedding anniversary at the Beltline
Oh,
Bar.
shoot. Sorry.
It's okay.
You're too young, so Brittney's
Yeah, probably.
representing the 25 and under crowd today.
Thank you
It's so good to have you,
for saying
Brittney.
under. Thanks. Happy to be here, you guys.
Brittney, so is Mexican food your favorite food then?
Definitely.
Okay.
My husband and I live in Wyoming, and so we have like, I'm not joking, 10 Mexican restaurants in a 4-mile radius of our house. It's
That's
the best.
fun. Oh,
So good.
for sure.
I'm actually learning Spanish so that I can just order in Spanish. So yeah, like third level.
I love it. That's awesome. Libby?
Also, do you want to tell us anything about your background?
Oh, yeah. Please do.
Like my ethnicity?
Yep.
Oh, sure. I'm 26.2% Mexican. I know that because my mother is obsessed with those 23andMe tests, and she's made every single person in our family take one. And she keeps it in her purse, on an Excel spreadsheet. So
So the apple doesn't fall far from the tree.
exactly.
It's in your blood.
Kind of Excel spreadsheet-ish as well.
And what brought you to Crossroads? How'd you get here, and what do you do here?
Oh, great. Yeah. So I went to Grand Valley, and so I was living downtown Grand Rapids and church shopping, as one does. And the first time I came to Crossroads, it was the year of back-to-back cookouts. And so I came, and you guys were having a cookout outside. And so I called my mom, hey, these people are having a cookout. I don't think I can stay. I totally went to a different church. I came back the next week. It was another cookout.
What?
I'm like, Mom, I don't think these people have church in the summertime. Oh my gosh. And so I went to a different church, came back, third time's the charm, ended up staying, loved it. It was great. And then I got on staff because of an on-mission class. I went up to Matt Stoll and was like, hey, I think you guys need an intern. Can I be that? And he was like, yes. And so I've been working here almost 5 years.
How'd you go from internship to full-time paid staff? That was quite the move there.
I'll tell you how she did. No one produces more at this church than Brittney. She gets it done.
Come on, that's
Yeah.
100% true. And if you are listening and you go to Crossroads, any event that you've ever been to, if you've participated in anything, including a Sunday morning, Brittney has had a role in that event in some way, shape,
True.
or
For sure.
form.
It's, yeah.
She's
trying to be
gritty like
modest,
that.
but yeah, nope, that's probably true.
Gritty.
Hey, humility and honesty are synonyms, and you're just being honest. It's
20
true.
things are coming off your conveyor belt almost every day. And so
Oh, yeah, thanks. I love this church. I think the really cool part about my job is that I get to have a hand in everyone's stuff, because I'm scheduling it or kind of helping people out in some way. Yeah. And I think the reason I'm probably good at it is because I'm genuinely passionate about everything that happens here. I care about it. I want it to succeed. So it makes my job easy for me.
Love
The best
it.
is whenever I say Brittney, she just responds automatically with a, how may I assist you? That's the best.
How may we assist you, Lib, now that you're back from Israel? You doing well? How's the jet lag?
Jet lag is really good, actually. I never really adjusted this time, so I slept terribly there, but it's helped me be like, fine, now that I'm back, as far as sleep goes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good. You processed a lot over there. Is that something you want to dive into a little bit or not at all? We don't have to talk
Sure,
about
you guys can ask questions. Yeah, I just spent 5 days in Israel, just being exposed, I would say, to the crisis. So talking to people, hearing their stories, talking to journalists, hearing the different angles from all perspectives, from Palestinian to obviously Israeli to Arab Israeli perspectives. And so I just got to engage. I was honored actually to hear stories, carry people's stories, be able to pray with people, pray over people, read scripture together, and just actually get in their shoes. So we have this word that sometimes we talk about on our Israel trips, and it's the word yada. It's used in the text a lot, and it just means a deeper understanding than just understanding things in your head or a head knowledge. It means that you've actually have experiential knowledge of something. And so, like in the Bible, when it says Abraham knew Sarah, we all know that doesn't mean he just like knew about Sarah. It means that he was intimately acquainted with Sarah in every way, shape, and form. He had experienced all that Sarah was. And so I think it's easy on this side of the sea to watch news stories and kind of compartmentalize the difficulties in Israel-Palestine. But to actually go there and humanize it, to hear the stories, and to actually know it by experience as opposed to just knowing it in your brain was really powerful for me. So it was a lot. I mean, there's a lot of pain, a lot of suffering, a lot of violence. And so it was, I feel like I was sending some emails back with a friend, and she's like, you're like a container right now for all that stuff. So when you hear all that, you just kind of internalize it and take it in. It takes a long time to process and kind of work all of that out. In the middle of that, just knowing that we have a king that sits on the throne. We have a very good shepherd, and he is in charge, and we are not. But we get to come alongside the suffering, and we don't have to choose a side. I think one of the most powerful things I heard was from one of the hostages' moms. Her name was Rachel, and her son Hirsch has been gone for 108 days. And she just said, you can be very sad that people in Gaza are dying, and you can also be very sad that people in Israel have died, and soldiers. And you don't have to not be sad about one or the other. You get to be sad about both. Another thing she said was, if you are only sad when one side's babies are dying, then you have a broken moral compass. And here she is saying this as the mom of someone who was kidnapped and probably most likely is not alive anymore. So that was just super powerful for me to hear, because I think sometimes we listen to the news or whatever and we think we have to take a side, like we have to figure out, and we actually don't. We're not in charge of any of it. We're not government officials. We have no sway. We have no power. We get to just be Jesus and be the hands and feet. And I'm really glad that I'm the person that has to make all those decisions, because I'm sure it's very difficult when you're in charge of a large people group. But I was grateful to play whatever role. And I think one of the people said, when you come here and when you hear my story and when you promise to pray for me, you carry a small piece of my burden for me. And that was super powerful too, just to know that, because it's hard when you're hearing all that to think, oh, I wish I could do something. And just to sit in the space of just coming alongside. That was, my role. So I was grateful and honored to be able to play that role. I'm still processing a lot of it, because honestly, it's overwhelming.
I think because there's a lot of people that are still interested in more of the details of your trip. How about if you continue to just highlight a couple of the people and places? And I'm asking this as your husband, not because I have leverage and power, but because I know, like, the first morning you were home, you just broke down and cried, and that's not something that you do very often. And it is because you did see and experience a lot. You heard a lot. So just maybe a little bit more about highlights of some of the places you were brought, some of the people that you sat at the feet?
Yeah. To be honest, it's just difficult to talk about. And I am the kind of person that doesn't wear my emotions on my sleeve that much. And so I've had moments where I've just, burst into tears because like the person who said you're a container for all of it, it just starts to overflow. The things that you saw, I think so many powerful things that we were able to be a part of. But one of them was we went down south to one of the kibbutzes that had been attacked. And that's Kfar Azah. That's the name of the kibbutz. And just one of the members of the kibbutz, who is second generation, she welcomed us because she was friends with the person who kind of set this up. And so there weren't any other tourists there. There was only Israeli Defense Forces. And she just walked us through like her town, basically. And she said, this person lived here, this person lived here. And, she explaining all the relationships. She explained the graffiti on the sides of the houses was put there by the Israeli Defense Force to like be a code of what they found. And if there's a red circle with a dot in the middle, that means that there are dead bodies found there. And she was just saying, this person was my grandfather's best friend, and he died, and his wife died, and their 3 children died, and 2 of their grandchildren died. So, and we hear that from the Palestinian Gaza side too, like multiple family members die in one strike. So that was it's just really real when you walk through it. And then walking through some of the houses was just brutal. I mean, it was just strange to me that we could just walk through these houses. Like a couple of them did have like caution tape, so you couldn't walk in some of them, but the ones that we walked through, and we're talking like blood all over the walls, bloody clothing. I mean, it's just there, just how it was. And so I guess just the power of being able, again, just to walk alongside and bear witness of the horrendous atrocities that happened as children were brutally murdered. And honestly, I can't even say most of the things that we were exposed to. I just wouldn't talk about it here. But really, really powerfully, just brutal.
You're doing
that's all
great,
I can say is
Lib.
brutal.
You're
I don't know what to say. So
No, you're doing great. I'm just also wondering if you could talk about the woman who prepared the bodies, and then also a Holocaust survivor as well.
Yeah, so we actually, one of the first mornings, one of our first exposures was they had a woman come in who, her job, she's 67, and her job in the army is to prepare bodies for burial. So in the Jewish culture, there's ritualistic ways in which you prepare a body before they're completely buried.
I mean, this goes back way before the time of Jesus.
It's called tahara in the Jewish language. And what they do is they have to completely wash the body and then wrap the body in white linen before it's buried, and then put in a pine box. And everyone in Israel is put into a pine box. I know here in the States we can buy like a really beautiful casket or a very modest casket. But in the Jewish mindset, death is the great equalizer. And so they only use pine boxes with holes drilled in the bottom so that when your body decomposes, you do, in fact, go down through those holes. Like the text says, dust to dust. So you actually become a part of the earth. But for her, and she counts this as a mitzvah, which in Jewish mindset is an act of righteousness, that her job is to take these bodies and prepare them for burial. Of course, these bodies that she was called to take care of are different because they've been victims of this atrocity. So there's extra things that she would have to do, which would be close any bullet wounds, completely clean the body of any type of blood, wrap all injuries in linen, white linen, before they would put then the white cloth on the body. And she just is weeping as she's talking because she said to us at the beginning, she said, I don't give speeches, like I'm not a professional speaker, but I'm just here to tell you my story. And then she had to read it, so she read this account of this one body that she had taken and prepared for burial. And she talked about, and I won't say all of it here, but she talked about closing the bullet holes. She talked about wrapping the head that had been completely bashed in, And then she talked about putting the white linen cloth on the body, and then the horror of it going to the family. And she could tell that as the stronger arms, which were the men, would carry the bodies out after the women had washed and prepared the bodies, that the blood was still seeping through the white linen. And at that point, you can't do anything else with it. You have to let the blood be buried with the body. So just tears streaming down her face that, like, I wasn't able to do a good enough job for this little body, and this was actually a child. Because women do women and men do men. So these women have to come in as a part of the Army in these situations to take care of the female bodies that are recovered. So that was just, I mean, and she's, fully giving of herself in this tragic and really horrific scenario. Multiple times the women that were gathered around this little body would pray over it. They would pray over every bullet hole. They would just in this loving final act of kindness to the body. And in the Jewish mindset, it is called the final act and most greatest act of kindness because it's a kindness that can never be repaid. Like, this body can never do anything for you in order to thank you, but you are giving all that you have in order to make sure that when the loved ones see the body, that it's prepared as best as possible before it's buried. So yeah, those are the kind of things that we were exposed to for 4 days straight. So it's intense. And then what do you say after that other than hug and say thank you and pray? And some people read Psalms, and just really tried to, you can't even begin to describe the deep pain and darkness that settles over a room like that when you are privileged to hear someone like that story. So, and then the Holocaust survivor too. We had a great dinner with a lady who's 87 who survived the Holocaust. So again, so much pain was expressed, and so it's tough.
You held yourself together very well there, Lib. You did.
Thank
great.
you.
Yes.
And I know you saw some really beautiful things too amidst that pain and sorrow, as far as just the community and how they surrounded one another. Could you maybe describe one of those stories that really ministered to me? Was just the men that were praying at the music festival site every single day.
Yeah, so we also visited that Nova Music Festival, the field where that festival was held. And if you go there now, there's a makeshift memorial. I'm sure, just because I know the Jewish mindset, and actually it's the Eastern mindset, this would happen in Gaza or any Palestinian town as well. They have a very a high importance put on remembering the past, remembering the hardships, and because it's what shapes you now, and it's what helps you move towards the future in a positive and healthy way, which I actually admire about the Eastern cultures, is they're not afraid to look back and then bring that to the present and then say, okay, how do I move forward in light of how that shaped me? So there's a makeshift memorial there, which is just literally like yardsticks in a pile of rocks with every person's picture on it. So there's 367-ish, don't quote me, I might have that wrong, people that were killed that day. So there's all these yardsticks stationed everywhere with pictures of their faces on it. And then still as the sun was setting that day on that field when we were walking around, and again, just praying for people, and there are family members there and friends and lighting candles and all that kind of a thing, that the Jewish men are there facing the sunset and doing the evening prayers. And since the festival, a group of men has come every night and done the prayers of the Jewish people at sunset, just as an intentional way of saying, God, be with these people. And just the communal support of people just making that trek to make sure there's people there that are praying every night, not just for God's presence, but for the people that are actually there mourning. I mean, there's a sense in which there's a community of people that are giving whatever they have. It's really a beautiful picture of, what the body of Christ could and should be as well. There's the one girl, I'm sure you guys have seen the posters of the hostages, where we got to speak to actually the graphic designer who made those posters, came up with the design and never realized it would be, she thought, they're thinking the hostages are going to come home in 4 days. Well, these posters are now plastered all over the world. And we got to talk to her and say, thank you for using your gifts for your community. I mean, that's more than just being a graphic designer. This is like, okay, all hands on deck. They need graphic designers. They need mechanics. They need people that can bring socks. They need people that can bring food. They need people that can rebuild houses. They need people who can repair cars. They need people that can be medical. They need everybody right now. And so I saw that in the country, that literally everyone's putting everything aside and doing whatever it takes to keep their community whole. And to me, that was just a beautiful picture of what Christ has called the church to be. All of us have important gifts, and we all need to be bringing all those things all the time in order to repair the world.
Wow.
Incredible.
Thank you for sharing that experience.
Thanks.
No. I don't know that there's even words.
Yeah. Any last thoughts or ideas?
I think I would like to say, just go on record as saying, after what I've seen, I just want to say that I completely condemn the acts of Hamas, and it is an apocalyptic death cult, and the elevated levels of unprecedented violence that they unleashed on random people across the borders of Israel is just something that I fully reject as being a part of what humanity should be about, regardless of your religion. So I know there's a lot of pain and there's definitely suffering on both sides, but those acts of violence were just unprecedented, and it's something that we have to decry as humans and a part of the planet. I just think we just have to be aware that the things that we see on the news are people. They're not just pictures. They have like flesh and blood, and that goes for all the atrocities. I mean, you were just in Ukraine.
Yeah.
So, and then sometimes you feel guilty, like, why am I just sitting in this room and behind this microphone when people are suffering? And so I think just making sure that we are about the kingdom of heaven and that we're not frivolous and we want to have fun, and God came for our joy. So, but also being aware of the deeper issues of life, the things that are underneath the surface that are weighing on the world around us. And we have a job, like we talk about here at Crossroads, to stand in the gap, to priest on behalf of the world. So there's not much we can do, to be honest. We can donate money, time, go see, bear witness, but we have the privilege of praying. And we've talked about that a lot in the book of Genesis. And we will continue to talk about that people are priesting and standing in the gap where there's brokenness, where there's hurting, and God's exercising judgment on a certain people group. There's people that are saying, no, God, don't, withhold your anger. So we have the joy of standing in the gap. And I think that's the biggest takeaway for me, is that I don't, right now, and I don't know how long it'll last, because I think these things do kind of wear off, but I don't want to forget that we have a job to do in the world, and that is to stand in the gap.
Yep.
Yeah. And that really it perfectly sums up, in a sense, what the first half of our text was this week in Genesis 14. I think about the beginning chapters of Genesis. Am I my brother's keeper? And in some ways in this text, Abram is saying, yeah, Lot's my relative. Mm-hmm. And I got to go get him.
Yep.
I'm not going to just allow my nephew to be taken advantage of. And so he essentially steps in with his trained men. I mean, that's the beginning of the story. And then we get to obviously this really interesting, peculiar passage with Melchizedek, and we'll dive into both. But
yeah, not just my nephew, but my nephew who left me, who left the path I walk, who left my God and went and just kind of lived his own life, forsaking me, forsaking the things I believe. And yet for Abram, it wasn't even something he had to debate. When he found out that his nephew was exiled, it's like, okay, I have to go and redeem him.
Yeah, and that required a lot from Abram. I mean, think about, you talked about this idea of 318 trained men in the household of Abram. Who are they? And what were they trained in?
Yeah, I mean, these are men that Abram became a part of Abram's community, a part of his family. So yeah, more than community, part of his family. And the text makes it clear, God makes it clear in Genesis 18, the reason that I've chosen Abram is that he not only will train his children, but he will train everyone in his household. And so these 318 men, I don't know, maybe he took some of them from Ur or Haran, his previous life. Maybe Pharaoh said, hey, here are some servants. And these people became like sons to Abram. And Abram invested his life in them and taught them his walk and how to walk. And so in this moment when tragedy struck, he had 318 men that were trained, that were ready to go.
Yeah, go ahead.
And that trusted him enough to go after Lot too, because maybe Lot wasn't their relative and maybe not part of them, but they trusted Abram so much that they were like, oh, he's your guy? Okay, we'll go with you. Like, we'll help you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
That's convicting, by the way.
It is convicting.
Because do I have that in my life? Do we have that in our life? Have we raised that up? Have we invested in that? Have we poured into people's lives, where people have that kind of trust, where they're willing to risk a lot, maybe even everything, for someone that's not even their family member, but yet probably was their family member because Abram so brought them into his family.
Yeah, I think this passage screams discipleship. At least that's what I heard. I remember driving home and sit down on the couch with my wife. She looks at me. She's like, how many trained little boys, little girls are in our household? She's talking about our family. But beyond that, when you think about just even the word training, it means that there's actually a moment where that training will be needed to be utilized. And discipleship is really that. And think about all the people in your life. Even I'm going to ask you a question here, Britt, about discipleship. But can you think of anyone in your life that no longer is in your life, but that served a purpose of training you for a season?
Oh, yeah, for sure. When I first came to Crossroads, I joined like a discipleship group that was like intentionally like doing this. And it was Faith Van Inc. And I didn't know her. But for 6 to 9 months of my life, I met with her and another girl like once a week. And we just talked life. We talked pop culture. We talked current events. We talked we talked about everything under the sun and more. And it was so crucial for me in that time just to have women that were older than me and more mature than me in their faith that I could trust, to look up to, that I could pray for the people in their family that weren't believers, that they could pray for people in my family that weren't believers. And so, faith comes to mind.
That's awesome. I mean, Faith, are you kidding me? Like, you struck gold.
Yeah, I know. Shout out Faith.
Yes.
Huge shout out to Faith.
But it's this idea that we're trained to be dispatched, and this is part of the language that we use here when we talk about 90-10. It's like, yes, the 10% is vital for the other 90, but the 10 is just part of the training process to go and be dispatched into the 90. And
I'd like to ask Brittney a question.
Yeah.
So can you speak for your generation right now in terms of, because I think the Faith Van Inc. generation sometimes thinks that your generation wants nothing to do with them. And maybe that is the case, but I'll let you speak to it.
No, I feel like we're craving that generation. Like, I think that, there's a lot of things that maybe separate, like, the generational, like, mindset of how to go about things. But I think that people my age are craving truth that doesn't waver. Truth that is truth because it's truth. Not like gray, not maybe. And so I think that something that I really appreciate about Faith's generation, about your guys' generation, is that, like, you know what you believe and why you believe it, and you haven't wavered on it. Right. And I think that that's something that more and more, especially as I get into my 30s of like coming up here soon, that like I feel good about standing more firm, even, which I'm a strong person. I stand very firm anyway, but I think it's something that as I get older, I feel more confident in being like, no, this is what I believe, or this is why I believe what I believe. And I think that that's qualities that I've taken from your guys' and faith generation.
Yeah. So there, you heard it. All of you who are over 40, 50, 60, 70, 80. Like,
We need you.
yes.
I agree with that 100%. I think the more that you grow in your faith, the more you realize how desperate you are for people that have walked before you. You know, it's one thing for you to experience it, but it's a whole nother thing for you to be able to literally live vicariously through another person who's been a disciple of Jesus longer than you have, that has walked a path that you don't necessarily have to walk if they've walked it first. And you can take that and, you know, avoid some of that's part of the way I think God redeems a lot of our stories, is that we're able to actually speak into somebody else's life and say, you don't have to walk this path. But here Lot is walking this path, and so Abram has to act. He has these 318 trained men, which means he's been training them well prior to this event of needing this to happen. And that kind of begs the question, like, are we going to be ready when those big moments, because one of the things you talked about on Sunday, Rod, was, you know, we think about our faith in terms of these big moments. Which, Britt, have you had those big mountaintop moments? And then what does your faith look like after coming off those big mountaintop moments?
A great question. To be honest, I can't think of like a big mountaintop moment in my faith. Like I lived in Africa for a couple of months, a couple times, and that I would say was the biggest mountaintop, quote unquote. You know, where you just come back and you're just mission trip fired up and stuff like that. But I feel like also, like in that time, I was like begging God for a mountaintop almost. I was like, where is my crying in the rain moment? Like I'm ready for you to break me. And and it just never happened, honestly.
But Brittney, would you even notice a mountaintop if you were climbing one?
I don't know.
The way you are
every day of my life, is that
She's
a
pretty
mountain?
Stable, Mabel.
I am pretty steady, but yeah, so I don't have one that I can think of. Awesome. I know like examples of them from other people, but like I could imagine how coming off of one would make someone feel. But
no, but
I want to say something though. Yeah. I don't know if we should ever seek a mountaintop. I think life will present a few of those moments, but I think people that are seeking the mountaintop are probably seeking fame, celebrity. Look at me. Look what I can do. Mm-hmm. And I think God will know when we need to climb a mountain and why we need to climb that mountain, and he will give us the strength to climb that mountain. Yep. And the question will be, will we be prepared to climb it when it's presented? But I don't think life is about going out and seeking, like, what mountain can I climb today?
No, totally.
For God.
No, and I didn't mean it as much in that sense as the defining moments of our life. We have defining moments.
Yep.
Not experientially, but can you think of defining moments? Because this is a defining moment for Lot.
It is.
You know?
Defining moment for Abram too, I think.
Yeah. So, and it becomes even more so when we get to the second half of the chapter, which is a super interesting part of the story of Abram's life.
Well, and I think sometimes we don't always know what the defining moments are until we look back.
Totally.
Sometimes, like, we don't even know. We might be in a defining moment and we don't even know it until you look back and you think, wow, God really used that to move me to the next phase. Or I can look back and see how God had his hand on my life in certain ways that maybe I currently wasn't aware of. And I think that's what we get in the Old Testament. We kind of get like a highlights reel of all these big moments that maybe as they were happening, maybe they felt like, first of all, we don't get to see all the days of mundane faithfulness. Like, we get these like highlights of Abram's life. There's lots of other days that aren't recorded. And maybe in Abram's life while he was living it, these felt like normal days. Like, this is what you do. You just go get your nephew if he's been kidnapped. But then looking back, and when God like lays his like template over your life, you can begin to see these moments where he was really shaping you and molding you. Where maybe in the moment you didn't feel like and you can look back in Africa, Britt, and say, God was shaping me, God was molding me. But in the moment, you're like looking for something really spectacular or fantastic. And it was really like in the quiet shaping of who you were because of your circumstances, because of your reliance on him, that's made you everything you are today, as opposed to pointing to one thing that just created this breakthrough moment for you. It's like the quiet and still shaping of God in your life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's beautiful. I actually like that you said that. I think a lot of people, are, especially my generation, are tempted to say, like, these are those mountaintop experiences, and I must have those to have a valid faith. But for you to just say, hey, I really haven't had those, is really beautiful for me, you know?
Well, I mean, that's why I knew we were looking at one of these moments in Abram's life, which is why I started the whole sermon, though, by talking about what his life really was. Yeah, this is one highlight in his life, but his life was really about the mundane, very mundane. I mean, a shepherd living life in a desert, every day was mundane. It's mundane faithfulness.
Yeah.
I mean, God asked him to walk. There's not anything much more mundane than just walking. I mean, he's not running, he's not climbing.
Yep.
Just one foot in front of the other. Follow me, walk.
That to me is much harder than the mountains, is to actually be faithful in the mundane. Because of what you said, Tryg, our society is telling us, go climb the big mountain and then blog about it, post it, show it off, and look at me, I climbed this big mountain. But the walk of faith is really being able, in the mundane things of life, to be faithful and wholehearted to God.
Yeah. And for Abram, because at this point, who knows what he's thinking? Maybe he's thinking Lot has to be part of that promise because I haven't had a son yet. I don't know what's going through his mind, but we know that he's missionally minded.
That's actually an interesting thought. I think he actually does think that. I think,
you know what I'm saying?
If I lose Lot, this whole thing's done. Everything God promised is dependent on a son, and he's the only son I have, and I'm 85 years old now. My wife's 75 years old, so that ain't happening. And I got to rescue this guy. That's probably what he's thinking too.
So I'm thinking to myself, though, how his identity's not wrapped, because I want to go off what you just said. His identity's not really wrapped up in this more than the mission that he's been called to. And is it even really a mission, or is it just it's a promise of blessing, I guess? But he's kind of walking the tightrope of faith where he's going, okay, I know I'm a participant in this, but God's going to make it happen, but maybe I got to do this anyway.
It was the way the world operated in that time. I mean, family was everything to a person, and they were called Beit Av, house of the father, because the father is responsible for everyone in his family. Everyone, all their needs. And so if something happened to someone, it's his responsibility. That's why the Bible talks about 3 groupings of people: the stranger, the orphan, and the widow. And those are 3 groups of people that are not under the protection of a father. And so Lot has just become a stranger. Now it's Abram's job to redeem, to restore Lot to the household. I don't think he's thinking to himself, should I do this or should I not do this? It's not an option for him. It's just the way fathers thought we're supposed to think, what they're supposed to do.
And that's a humbling thought amidst betrayal in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
How far did Abram go for Lot?
Well, we have some markers in the text, all the way past Dan. So the markers, biblically speaking, all the way to the north is Dan, and all the way to the south is Beersheba. From Dan to Beersheba, that's how the Bible oftentimes talks about the north and south border. So he went all the way past the north because he had to go through Dan. So we're talking 120, 30 miles.
Yeah.
Tracking them down.
And walking, probably. I mean, maybe riding a camel. That's debatable, but that's a long way.
So one of the things that's unclear to me in this text, even after studying it, is because now I want to move to Melchizedek, if that's okay. Because I really want to camp there for a while. Is like, this dude just appears in the text, it doesn't really give us an introduction. Like, why do you think that is? Like, all of a sudden, we go from Abram routing these dudes. He gets Lot back and all of his stuff that was taken. And then all of a sudden it says, then Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. Where's he coming from? What's going on here?
How about you, Britt?
Yeah,
I'm
Britt.
kidding.
Unsure. No idea. Next question.
Had you heard of Melchizedek before this weekend, or?
I had just from Bible studies
Yeah.
on Genesis previously. But yeah, I had a lot of questions, honestly, too. So
Yeah, no,
please.
I think the Bible is more than a story. I actually think it's a mystery. I mean, we know how much God loves a story. I actually think he even loves a mystery. And Melchizedek is very mysterious.
Very
And the Bible wants Melchizedek to be mysterious. Like, there's things that you're like, why does the Bible not tell us? Even up until this point in Genesis, all the important characters have been given a toledot, which is their genealogy. The genealogy is shining a spotlight on the fact that this person is very important to the storyline of the Bible. Melchizedek there's no genealogy, okay? So he's right out of the gates, very mysterious. And it feels like he just appears.
Okay, this is maybe a dumb question, feel free to. Is he real? Like, is this, like, when you were saying that the verse in the New Testament about how he has no genealogy, no father, no mother, that made my mind kind of jump to the next chapter, maybe, of the three strangers that come.
Correct.
And so I'm like, when you were preaching, my mind's going like, is he real? Like, you know what I mean? Like a real, obviously he's real.
Yes.
But like, is he like a real guy even? Is he just some version of Christ? Like,
I think
is that please?
No, it's a great question. And I think that's how we should start to think about this if we're going to think deeply about this text and what this text is trying to do.
So can I toss to Libby? Because we were just having this discussion before we even got on the podcast back in the offices. And you said something super interesting about the Bible. Do you remember what you said?
Well, I think hopefully we're going to talk more about this, but I actually believe this is God incarnate. So I think it's Jesus. Anytime the Bible says anytime that, we see God in the flesh, we see it in the face of Jesus. So I actually believe this is Jesus. And I think Jesus is throughout the whole Old Testament. And most people would say that, and that the whole Old Testament points to Jesus. But more than that, I think Jesus is actually in the Old Testament, because I don't see the second person of the Trinity just sitting back for, 1,000 years. I think he's like, put me in, coach. Like, I'm ready. I want to go be a part of the story. And so I think this is Jesus. That's just my personal conviction, that I believe for a lot of reasons that this is Jesus showing up here, and which is God in the flesh. So I think he was real in the sense that in that moment he had a body and he was a physical person, but that he didn't have a beginning or an end. So that maybe after this event he was gone again. I don't, I'm not pretending to know everything, but I think in this moment he meets Abraham as the face of God in that valley.
So, Rod, tell us some of the descriptors that would make us believe that, because I'm on that train too, but you have some of those right before you. So what are those?
Yeah, so Hebrews tells us that he's king of Salem, but it doesn't want us to know that he's king of a place, because then it says Salem means peace. It's the word shalom. So he's the king of shalom. The name Melchizedek itself could be less of a name and more of a title. Melchi is their word for king. Tzedek is their word for righteousness. So that might be his name, but it also might just be his title, the king of righteousness.
King of righteousness, and basically what you just said is he's also king of peace.
King of peace. Then it says he's priest of God. And it's the first time we get the word priest, which I explained in my sermon why that's significant. It wants to highlight Hebrews, that Abram paid him tithes, and the Bible makes it very clear, You never tithe another person. Tithing is one of the highest acts of worship there is. So this isn't just even an act of allegiance. This is an act of worship, and you only worship God. So that, then it says without mother or father. Who doesn't have a mother or father? Without beginning or end. Does that mean he's eternal? And then it says resembling the Son of God, and that word actually could mean a manifestation of the Son of God. So
Can we pause there for a second too, though, because I want to play devil's advocate. Because
Yeah, go for it.
one of the scholarly arguments against it being Jesus is this term resembling, which is a specific Greek word, and it's translated differently in different places. And the argument goes, well, it's translated to be made like, and so to be made like someone means that there has to be two individuals. But it also can be translated to make a copy of.
Mm-hmm.
So that's very different than just to be made like. Like if you're a copy of something, that means that you're a representation. So in my opinion, I think it's still fair to say, even though he's resembling the Son of God,
Right.
it could be, this is him, but he came in the form of Melchizedek.
Okay, so start asking this.
Melchizedek.
I'm trying to say
Think about
like
it from
Libby
this
says it.
angle.
Melchizedek.
Mel.
What if it's not?
Mel, for short.
What if it's not Christ? Then what do you have? You have someone who's King of Shalom. You have someone who is priest of God, who has no beginning, no end, is eternal, kingly priest, priestly king. Wow. So yeah, you
Right.
have two competing
You have another
Christ.
Jesus.
And some people say, well, this is the Christ of the Old Testament. And I get why
Right.
people say that. And I actually think, yep, you're right. This is the Christ of the Old Testament. But here's the problem with that, is that do we just have a Christ of the Old Testament and then a Christ in the New Testament as if they're two different Christs? Or do we have one Bible and one Christ? And I read the Bible. We have one Bible. We have a First Testament and a Second Testament. And the whole book is about Christ. And
Amen.
why wouldn't this Christ start the mystery? Who am I?
Does the name Melchizedek show up a lot more in the Old Testament? Is this the only time we see it?
It shows up in Psalm 110.
Yeah, the Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek.
Okay, Psalm 110 is the most quoted Old Testament text by our New Testament writers. Peter, the first sermon he preaches in Acts 2, Pentecost, his text is Psalm 110. Jesus claims Psalm 110 about himself.
The Lord said to my Lord.
Yep. And
Well, but
so-
to order your question, to answer your question specifically, there's no one else in the Bible named Melchizedek.
Right. He doesn't show up physically.
No.
Again,
There's not like
after
another
this.
person named that either, like not one of Joseph's sons. It's like, this is the only person in the Old Testament that's named this, and this is the only time that he shows up. Now, he's referred to
Right.
in other places in the Bible, like Psalm 110, but this is it. This
Yeah.
is the first and only.
Yeah, but you can read more about him in Hebrews 7, which is a long explanation
Yep.
of who he is, and I think only makes the case stronger that this is Christ incarnate.
Hey, no one has to buy what I'm trying to sell.
But also, he's a priest king. Can we make that distinction too? Why is that significant that he's a priest king? Because no Levitical priest could ever be also king, correct?
Once you get the establishment of the kingly line through David, and David is from the line of Judah, the priestly line is from the line of Levi. So, therefore, the high priest always came from the tribe of Levi, and the king always came from the tribe of Judah. So, then you get to Zechariah and Psalm 110, where it talks about these messianic texts that talk about the Messiah is going to be the king and the priest and the king. You're left with, how can this happen? If someone's born of the line of Judah, they're not of the line of Levi. And if they're born of the line of Levi, they're not of the line of Judah.
And the
Yeah.
only way it could happen is if you have no genealogy.
There you go.
Here's another interesting thought that I want to get your opinion on that I had today too. So obviously Salem, peace, But also, you talked about how Salem is half of the word Jerusalem, first being Jireh, which is the provision, right?
Yeah, it means Jehovah Jireh. We say that sometimes.
Yeah,
the Lord provides. And that's what Abram named that top of the mountain
Yeah.
where Jerusalem is, Mount Moriah. He called that place Jehovah Jireh. So
So,
you add the Jireh
yeah.
to Salem and you get Jerusalem.
Jerusalem. Okay, so he's the king there. But I think this is really interesting that he's the king there before they have conquered Canaan and it has become the promised land.
And even stop and think that there's two Jerusalems. Because,
Oh, wow.
well,
Yeah.
the word itself, Yerushalayim, the Im ending in Hebrew, they have im, which is rs, making something plural. Im is their way of making something a dual. Yerushalayim is a dual. In other words, and I heard this explained one time when I was in Jerusalem. I was overhearing this guide. We were in the city of David, standing over David's palace, and she was talking to her group, and she's explaining the word Yerushalayim, saying that the reason why it's a dual is because there's an earthly Jerusalem and a heavenly Jerusalem, and when Messiah comes, he's going to consummate the heavenly Jerusalem with the earthly Jerusalem, make them one. My point being, Messiah isn't just someone who is going to reign in the earthly Jerusalem, but he's going to bring the heavenly Jerusalem. So it says he's from Salem. Which one? Earthly, heavenly,
Or both.
or both?
And is he there before he calls his people into the land?
Again, the Bible's a mystery.
I
And you
know.
got to read the whole thing. And this is why the Bible's beautiful. It's so beautiful.
It is beautiful. But also, I think this story allows us to live in that mystery. We don't have to dissect the Bible like it's this mathematical equation by which when we get all of the right answers, we get a full picture of God. I think there's actually a piece of God that he desires to keep a mystery. And I think sometimes when we do theology or we do doctrine, we put God in these little boxes and it removes that mystery, and then we can make God and fashion him into whatever we want him to be.
Yeah.
So I think this story is beautiful on that level too, because it doesn't allow us to do that. Like, who is this guy?
And then when you stop and think about the kind of king Jesus is and the kind of priest he is, kingly priest, priestly king, his throne is a cross. And the meal that he gave us is communion, which is the bread and the wine. And so I don't think this is coincidence then that this king of righteousness is coming down the hill to meet Abram. I don't know how Abram feels at this moment. I think he's a godly man, so he's not too arrogant, but he could be the most arrogant person in the world right now. He just defeated the 4 kings who defeated the 5 kings. And he now is the king. And yet, this Melchizedek, it's almost like with urgency, has to come down and meet him.
Humbles him.
And to feed him this bread and wine. Yeah, you, Abraham, you need this bread and you need this wine.
Well, and I love the humility, like you said already, that he gives tithe, but that's not all it says. It says that Abraham bows low before him. And so you've got a picture of Abraham here, who is, like you just mentioned, the king, to this character that's coming and bringing a meal of bread and wine. And we see Abraham then giving him a tenth of all of his spoils and bowing low to the ground before him. In a sense, it's worship.
It's
and
worship.
He's worshiping
Yes.
Melchizedek here. So it's just an amazing and beautiful, like, to me, I feel like it's a gift. Anytime that, like, Jesus shows up in your life like this, especially like after being in this, stressful, like, battle, basically. He's fighting to redeem. And then this Prince of Peace, let's just talk about that. Like, he's just come out of war. So this Prince of Peace is coming and soothing him, giving him bread, giving him wine, blessing him. It says that he blesses him. And Abraham just receives all that. He just bows. And like, Jesus just shows up for Abraham in the most, I guess we have to say Abram, in the most, like, beautiful space and time in the midst of brokenness, in the midst of hard work, in the midst of like grit, in the midst of Abram trying to do the right thing, the best thing, which is exhausting, sacrificing all of his men. And Jesus just shows up here and gives him exactly what he needs and speaks blessing over him. And to me, that's just beautiful because, I mean, I know I've experienced that in my life with the Lord when, things are really bad and he shows up. And sometimes he shows up in the flesh of another person. Not that that's the Son of God, but like a good friend like Brittney, who's like, hey, how can I assist you? Or, to me, it's just such a gift. It's such a picture of who Jesus is in our lives.
Yeah. I mean, that's so good that Jesus blesses him. It makes me wonder, did they talk? Did they have conversation? I don't know if this is okay for me to wonder these things or think these things, but I'm still going to express them right now. Jesus could have looked right over his shoulder and said, right over there is going to be a place called Gethsemane. Can you see it right over there? And this is what I'm going to someday come to the world and what's going to happen over there. And then up on that hill is Calvary. And why am I giving you the bread and the wine? Because this is what's going to happen up on that hill. And this is why, Abraham, you can be confident that this is my blessing. This is what my blessing is to you and to your children and to your children's children. And you can be confident I'm going to be faithful to you. You are going to have a child, and that child is going to have a family, and you're going to have progeny. But this is where the whole thing's going. I'm sorry, that's where my mind goes. And I don't need that in the text. And even if I find out someday that Jesus said, nope, I never had that conversation with him, because I will ask him. But I wonder those things. I think the story begs us to like think about this as the most amazing story in the world.
When you think about how to apply some of these thoughts, Britt, what comes to mind for you? I'm just interested. No, you don't have to have some crazy answer. I'm genuinely curious when you think about that.
Yeah, no, I feel like I was actually kind of thinking something like this question when I was listening back to the sermon in my car yesterday. I was kind of thinking about that because I was thinking, along the lines of like application. I'm like, what did I like learn from this other than just like soaking in the history and the context and stuff, which I feel like we do a great job of. I'm trying to think. Like, I don't know. I think the overall thing is something that you mentioned like a couple minutes ago, Libby, just about seeing Jesus more in the Old Testament. Like, I don't know if it was like necessarily a lesson, although I did really like the lesson of just not taking anything from Sodom, which we haven't really touched on yet. I loved that part. But just the lesson of just like asking God even to show me more of how he wants me to learn from the story of the Old Testament. I think my age group of people spends a lot of time in the New Testament, and because we can very blatantly see Jesus and learn from that. But I love digging into the Old Testament and trying to find where Jesus is there because he is. Is that cool?
No, I love it. No, I was genuinely curious. That's amazing. And I think it's true. And we also forget sometimes that we worship a triune God. So regardless of him even coming up in the name of Jesus or as Melchizedek, he's there. Mm-hmm. And we can be confident in that. And I think we're going to see his fingerprints, dare I say, more and more and more.
Let me throw one thing out here.
Do it.
This is the first time the word priest is used. And we just don't live in a world of priests. Unless you're Catholic, then you have priests, so you're a little bit more comfortable with the term. But the ancient world, like, you could not conceive of a God that didn't have a temple where there were priests that were performing sacrifices so that you could draw near to that God. They could not conceive of it. And I think today we've grown so flippant with our understanding of God that he's kind of this buddy that we carry around in our back pocket. And while he loves us like crazy, I think we forget that he really is unapproachable. especially in the state that we're in, and that he is holy, holy, holy. And what is necessary for us to actually draw near to this God and be in relationship with this God. We absolutely need a priest. We need a sacrifice. And that's why the Old Testament is important, because the Old Testament is full of priests and sacrifices and temples where God lives. And it's reminding us and teaching us that without a priest and a sacrifice, we could never draw near to this God. And yet, when Christ comes, he says, I am the temple. I am the house of God. I am the sacrifice, the Lamb of God. And I am the priest. I am the one who makes you clean, whole, pure, beautiful as you were on your wedding day. And that's where the whole story is going as well.
I know. I can't help myself.
So then my question is, what does that mean? Does that mean anything to us? There's this church in Chicago on LaSalle Street, right by Moody Bible Institute. I remember when Libby's dad used to work there, I'd walk past it when we'd visit. Huge engraving of Jesus Christ crucified on a cross, probably 20 feet high. Just beautiful artwork. And then underneath were these words, to all you passing by, does this mean anything to you? It's a great question. Does it? And if so, why?
That's a mic drop.
He's our priest. That's how he is our priest.
Well, and a little preview for next week too. Here you have the first usage of priest, at least explicitly, because we've talked about the picture being there with Adam and Eve. And next chapter, you could say, is the first sacrifice. So here it's being set up.
Great commercial, man.
That's all we'll
Let's
say
go.
there.
I love it.
I want to go back to Brittney, what you were talking about. You said you loved, unlike you, I was actually not at church, nor did I listen to it because I was in Israel. But
Good excuse. I
yeah,
guess.
so I'm the low man on the totem pole here. But what was your takeaway from the Sodom, not taking things from Sodom?
Yeah, I was really pondering that point. I think I'm still pondering it because it's like living in the world but not being of the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just trying to evaluate, like, what do I take from the world that I think is okay, and to be honest, I don't have a good answer at the moment. But I also kind of along in that the second part of the text, I think the king of Sodom offers Abram the riches in exchange for the people. And it's something I didn't pick up on like the first time I had read it. I'm trying to think of what verse that is at the moment. I don't have Bible on me.
22.
And
22.
so Abram almost does an exchange of not just Lot, but of all the other people that like betrayed him and betrayed the faith and were living in Sodom, that were under Lot and like following Lot. And he takes them all back and redeems all of them in exchange for like all of the riches and the plunder from the war. And so I think one of the things that I was thinking about afterwards is just like, how do I go after people more than I go after other things that aren't necessarily like bad things, like money? Money's not bad in itself. Well, maybe you guys disagree. I don't know. But yeah, but anyway, so I think that was one thing that I took away, is just like, how do I go after the people that need to be redeemed more than the stuff? Yeah.
I love it.
That's a great thought.
It's really
It's
good.
a beautiful point.
It's a beautiful point.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And especially because there becomes this syncretism too, where we say, okay, well, I'm not going to full sail accept Sodom, or we'll call it the ways of the world to use the illustration you're doing, but I want a little bit of it along with these other things, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And Abram says, I don't want any of it. None. And I think that's convicting for me too. Like, You talked about it a couple weeks ago when it's Lot's pitching his tents outside of Sodom. Sorry, we just watched a video today of a guy trying to say that in a sermon, pitching his tents, and he couldn't say it because he had a weird accent.
Well, I had a hard time in the second service. I had to just gloss over it. It was not going to come out right.
But you don't want to play with fire. You talked about playing with fire. Eventually that thing will burn so close it'll consume you. I mean, so, yeah. It's just interesting because it doesn't... We think that we can handle a little bit, but we can't. It will consume you the moment that wick has started burning.
Yeah, I think Abram looked at that as the forbidden fruit. I'm just not going to touch it. I'm going to stay away from it. Here, King of Sodom, you can have everything back.
Well, it's interesting how he chooses to say it too. He says, he refers to God in his response as the possessor of heaven and earth.
Yeah.
Like the one who owns absolutely everything. I'm not going to do this petty exchange with you because I actually serve a God or the king that like owns all your stuff and all this stuff and everything that you see. And so I'm not about to compromise in a sense and say that. So people out there might say that you're the one who made me rich. Like I want everyone to know that the possessor of heaven and earth is the one that's bestowed on me everything that I have. And whatever you're offering is like a cheap exchange. And to Brittney's point, the people are so much more valuable. Like that's what he went. He didn't go to like hopefully collect a bunch of new sheep and goats and money and clothes and skins. And I mean, we're talking about the ancient world here. He went to actually collect people. And he could have because it's like an agrarian substandard life, like they're living to survive. Like all those things would be tempting for him to have extras of, and he's got plenty. And he's like, I want people. I want souls. I want to rescue souls, not things.
And think about the story. Abram has just been an instrument in the Lord's hand, rescuing people. And then Melchizedek comes, offers them bread and wine. We've already talked about what that picture is. And then it says, blessed be Abram by God the Most High, creator of heaven and earth, and praise be to God Most High, who delivered your enemies into your hand. That's verse 20. So what's Melchizedek saying? Hey, Abram, even though you went and did this, it was really God that saved all those guys because he delivered your enemies into your hand. And now he brings forth this meal that is representative of that salvation, if we think that it's this communion. It's just, the layers of the biblical story are so impressive.
Then Abram is saying to the king of Sodom, I swore an oath to the Lord after he had just met with Melchizedek. So then you're wondering what they talked about.
Exactly. Yes. See, there was conversation there. That's so good. I love it. And
in your text, that Lord is all capitalized, which means it's not just like a title like my Lord, like my master. It's actually an acronym for the word of God. Lord capitalized is always God. It's not just like someone who's like your master, like
Yahweh.
Yeah. So like Abraham's men would have called Abraham Lord probably just because he was like above them. This isn't that. This is an actual substitution for the name of Yahweh. So he's basically saying, I just swore an oath to Yahweh. And also he just met with Melchizedek. So if that's not also proof that this Melchizedek is God in human flesh, because he says, I just talked to the Lord and I just swore an oath to him, like you just brought out so brilliantly, Britt.
It's awesome. And then what God says to Abram in your text this next week, I am your shield, Abram. I am your very great reward. Like, just affirming, like, you stay the course. Let me continue to be your reward, the thing that you live for, your prize in life.
Yeah.
Go back to your mundane life of being a nomad, a shepherd in the desert.
Yeah. We think reward and we think lottery. You know, Abram thinks reward, he thinks son. But God says, I am.
I am.
I'm that. And just this whole passage too reminds me of, is it Matthew 14, where the storm comes? Jesus calls, I guess Peter asked Jesus to call him out onto the water. He does. He saves him. Peter worships Jesus. And there's a deafening silence. Like Jesus doesn't turn him away. I just see Peter before him, just prostrate almost. And this is how I see Melchizedek in this passage.
Yeah, it's great.
Not turning away the worship of Abram, the tithe. So
Bowed before his king of righteousness.
yeah. I don't know. Is there anything else that we...
I think it's, let's get ready for next week.
Thanks for having me, guys. This was fun. Let's do
It's
it again
great
sometime.
to have you, please, for sure.
Yeah,
Great to have you,
absolutely. Britt, any last thoughts? What else other than this is God doing in your life right now that he's teaching you? I'm interested.
Wow, love it. Okay, yeah. I feel like I'm in a really cool season of life. Actually, now that I think about it, I'm like waiting on a big moment. Actually, right now. No, not like that. No, I'm not pregnant. Sorry, just to tell everyone out there.
We're all waiting.
No. My husband and I live in Wyoming, Michigan, which is a very high, like, Hispanic population. And recently I started taking Spanish classes so I could get to know my neighbors a little bit better. My husband has just started volunteering for a local nonprofit that's got a lot of families from our neighborhood in it that he's been driving around and stuff. So that's like the context of it. We're really trying to press into our neighborhood. Like, we're like hoping this year to maybe finish our basement so we can start housing some young adults that need some help and guidance and stuff like that. And so, anywho, I feel like God's been teaching us just a lot of like presence. Like, I feel like I've heard Libby talk about a lot recently, just ministry of presence. And we've lived in our house for like 2 years. So we've been just waiting a little bit on what he has for us in this neighborhood, and just while we're young and kidless, like what do you want us to do, Lord? So right now we're waiting on that. So prayer would be cool for that. For us, if you're out
love
there,
that.
Brittney and Noah Burrell, you can pray for us.
If anybody's wondering like what Crossroads is, it's that right there. That is Crossroads, what you and your husband are up to.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Trying.
Love
Anywho, so yeah, that's what he's been teaching us. So we're waiting on him at the moment, but also trying to learn Spanish, which is hard, but it's good.
Yeah, well, that's a beautiful
Sounds
thought,
impossible.
too. Just waiting on the Lord.
Yeah.
Abram does a lot of that.
True.
So,
You're in good company.
yeah, you're in good, and a lot of faith is that. Rod, you want to try to sign us off?
For sure. Lord, thank you for life. Thank you that you partner with us. Thank you that you give us so many opportunities. Like Brittney and Noah opening their house, learning Spanish. Libby going to Israel. All the daily opportunities that we have to partner with you. Thank you that we have someone like Abraham that we can look at, who wasn't perfect, who made many mistakes, but was wholehearted. Would we be wholehearted for you, for your sake, and for the sake of the world? Amen.
Amen. This is Locker Room, where we break down sermons, stories, and scriptures for the race of our faith. If this podcast has been serving you, hit follow on the notification bell. That way you can stay up to date on the newest episodes. We love you, Crossroads. Thanks for joining us, and have a great week.